Hi, today we're going to talk about segmented control. And this is the beginning of our discussion of various controls in the user interface that we can put on the view. I've got the organizer up, and if you don't know how to get to the organizer, under the window menu of Xcode, we pull that down, we'll see this selection organizer, which will bring up our organizer. We can search for any class that we want to by using this center icon, the magnifying glass icon. We can search, and here I've searched for UI segmented control. And this will show us the various methods and properties on the control and on any class. But what I'm interested here is looking at the view chain, or I'm sorry, the object chain, the class inheritance chain. UI segmented control, like all controls, inherits from UI control, which inherits from UI view. And UI control gives us specific control class methods. UI view teaches the control how to draw itself. UI responder responds to touch events. And of course, everything inherits eventually from NSObject. So after this presentation, I would encourage you to read this class reference, UI segmented control class reference, and then also read the UI control class reference. And then later, we'll talk about UI view, and we'll read that class reference at that time. So I'm going to start an application, and this is going to be a single view application so that we can get straight to this segmented control. And I'm going to call this application segmented. And we'll use a storyboard. And we'll save it. And when this application comes up, we will see that we have an app delegate, a storyboard, and a view controller. And then, of course, in supporting files, we're also going to have main. So let's look at this storyboard. Storyboard is this collection of scenes. Each scene has a view controller. We're only going to use one scene today. But the view, if we look under this view controller, we will see a view. And the view controller's view is, of course, that view. So with that view, we're just going to set the background color to a green color for now. And then we're going to drag out the control we're interested in today, which is the segmented control. And we see that it has two segments by default. Well, we can add any number of segments that we want to. I'm just going to add one more. And we'll center it in the view. And we can change each of these segment titles, either by double-clicking or changing here and selecting the segment. So this first one I'm going to call green. The second I'll call blue. And the third I'll call red. This is an active control. We'll use it as an active control. So we're going to need an action associated with it. So let's do that very quickly. As we know, it's an IB action. We'll call this color selected. And it's a UI segmented control pointer. And sender is fine. And then we're going to take the action header, copy it. We'll paste it into our implementation file. And now very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to look at which of the three index, there's selections, the user has pressed. And that is gotten to by sender dot, sender being that control, selected segment index. So we're going to wrap this into a switch statement. And actually, we'll let Xcode give us the code hinting. So this is going to return an NS integer. There are 3 cases. And the first case is 0. This is a 0-based array. 0, 1, and 2. So 0 is going to be green, 1 is going to be blue, and 2 is going to be red. So what we're going to do is just set the controller's view's background color. And in this case, we'll set it to UI color, green color. We'll just grab this line. Very simple piece of code. And in this case, it's going to be blue color. And in this case, it'll be red color. So now if we go back into our storyboard and take this action and control click it and drag to our view controller, we can grab the sent event color selected. Now when we run our application, green is selected, the background color is green. We can select or deselect any one of these buttons. We'll leave it selected, that's fine, to indicate that the background color is currently green. And we'll go ahead and compile and run our, build and run our program. And there we go. We select blue, the blue is selected, likewise red, likewise green. Very nice and very boring. But what we've done is we've dragged this control out onto our view and hooked up an action method to it. This should begin to be very familiar to you, this pattern of an action method with an active control. It could be a button, could be any sort of active control, could be a switch. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drag out a round rect button. And now we're going to actually dynamically create a segmented control. So this is going to be called make segmented control. The button resizes itself. So of course it's an active element and we're going to need an action. So we can grab this one and just alter it for our own purpose in this case. And this method we'll call make segmented in this case it's not a segmented control, it's a button, and sender's fine. And then we'll grab the header into the view controller. And paste it. All right. Before we forget, because I tend to forget these things, we need to click and drag to make segmented control press to hook up our action, because I like to forget those when I'm programming. So now, the first thing we need to do is instantiate a segmented control. That's very simply done. We use a UI segmented control class, and we instantiate an object, and we'll call it my seg control. And that's going to be equal to, we'll make a little bit more room over here, UI segmented control, and then we're going to allocate it on the heap, and then initialize it with items. And the items are going to come from an array. And we are going to just write this array right here. And that array is going to use a class method of NSArray called ArrayWithObjects. And now we can just start typing our objects. So these are going to be the names on each button of the segmented control. So let's just use 1, 2, whoops, and 3. I'll make sure our brackets line up, and there we go. So now we've created a control, but we haven't added it to the view yet. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make a frame for our view to live in. Now I'm just going to do this very quickly. CGRect is a C struct, and we're going to make a frame, and I'm just going to put some values in here without really explaining them. When we talk about views, we'll explain what these values mean. Sorry about the spelling. So that's just going to set up a frame for our segmented control to live in. The next thing we need to do is add our segmented control, set our segmented controls frame to segFrame. So that's simple. My segControl.frame, the property frame on my segmented control, is equal to segFrame. That's probably the simplest line in this entire example. And then we're going to add that view to self-view as a subview. Self, again, is the controller. The view is the controller's view. And we'll just add my segControl. And there we go. Now, there's a couple things wrong with this, and we'll address those here in just a second. When we allocate, and we're allocating here, when we use this keyword alloc, or this method alloc, we're creating a new object on the heap. If we don't do anything with that, we're going to leak memory because we're retaining this object essentially forever. And when we add it to the view is retaining this object for the entire life cycle of the view. So I don't want to get into memory allocation right now, but I do want to encourage you and actually require you to use a keyword here, auto-releasing, which essentially says, I'm going to let this go when I no longer need it. And I no longer need it as soon as it's added to the view. So it's going to, the compiler is going to look at my code and release this object the next time through the run loop if I no longer need it. Well, the view is going to retain it. The compiler will release the object. But we're going to talk about memory management in the later segment. But for right now, whenever you instantiate using alloc inside a method, you should set this object to be auto-releasing. And the other thing we want to do is after we've added the subview, we want to make the button that added the subview hidden. And the reason we're doing that is we don't want to add more than one subview and just stack them up. So now when we run it, and make sure that we hooked up, yes, touch up inside, make segmented control. So now when we run this, we'll get a new segmented control. after we click the button. And the button should also disappear. And we do. We have 1, 2, 3, and remember that that is the values we put in the array. If we put 4 values in the array, it would have 4 segments and so on and so forth. It auto-sizes the buttons within itself, so that's very, very convenient for you. The last thing we want to do, this is great, but if we push buttons on this control, nothing happens. So let's just write a little action method, and in this case, we're going to return void. Because remember, we don't have this control in Interface Builder, so we can't actually drag an action to it. We've made it on the fly. So we're just going to call this little action mySegPressed. And of course, we're looking for a UI segmented control. And it's just going to very simply log out the selected segment index that we were looking at for our color selected. So we're going to log that selected segment index we already know is an NS integer. So it's an integer. And we're just going to log out sender dot selected segment index. We would do something more interesting here, but for this example, we're just logging out the index. Now we need to tell this segmented control when it is pressed what to do. So we can do that right here, anytime before it goes to the view. So mySegControl add target. Remember, it's a target action design pattern that we're working with here. The target is the controller itself. The action is a selector. And that selector is going to be the name of what we want to happen. In this case, mySegPressed. And the control event is the same control event that we used for this one. And if we look at that, it is value changed. Well, now that control event is called UI control event value changed. And we'll do that. And so now, when this segmented control is pressed, it will log out the sender's selected segment index. So let's make sure that works. And if that works, we're done. So when we click these, of course, the background color changes. When we click Make Segmented Control, that button disappears. We have 1, 2, and 3. If we click 1, we're logging out 0, which is that selected segment index. We already knew that. And then 2, we log out 1. And then the index of this one will be 2. And so on and so forth. Interestingly enough, we don't have to do anything else if we add another button. It will take care of things for us. So let's add button 4. We'll run. Now we have 4 buttons, and the index on button number 4 is 3. 3 is 2. 2 is 1. 1 is 0. So that's a brief look at segmented controls. Read up on UI segmented control and also UI control. And if you're ambitious, you can start reading on UI view. Thank you very much.